So coming up next is another interesting panel discussion on science and policy, striving for an impactful, inclusive and sustainable future. The panel discussion is moderated by Ms. Susie Winter, who is Vice President External Communications at Springer Nature. Over to you, Susie.
Yes, hello everybody, and to those of you just joining, welcome to Springer Nature's Science and Technology Symposium. As you just heard, my name is Susie Winter and I'm Vice President of External Communications at Springer Nature, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator for the panel session today, which will explore the relationship between science and policy making. And really, with governments increasingly looking to leverage their investment in research to more effectively benefit society, this session will explore the role of policy within the research ecosystem and how approaches vary to their design, implementation and assessment of relevant policies that shape opportunities for an inclusive and sustainable future. Now, this topic alone could fill an entire conference, but unfortunately we'll have time to explore just a few themes within this in the next 45 minutes. So time permitting, some of the themes and topics we'll be looking to explore are the increasing tension between academic independence and the need to demonstrate a return on investment, the growing debate around citizen engagement and what role, if any, is there for the citizen scientist. How important is impact, and how important is it that we all understand impact to mean the same thing? How is the focus of funding changing? And finally, when does collaboration between nations, funding bodies and labs stop and competition needs to kick in? So I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel to help us explore and provide valuable insights to these issues, and I'll be delighted if my fellow panelists will appear on the screen shortly. I'm delighted. Welcome, Patrick. I'm delighted to be joined by, we'll just wait for Nicole and our final panelist, because actually in my notes I'm talking about Aisha first. There you are, wonderful. Welcome everybody. So yes, my wonderful panelists to help explore these themes today. As I said, joined by Dr. Aisha Chowdhury, who's a researcher and innovator by training and presently working as a consultant with the World Bank. Aisha is also an advisor with Stanford University and adjunct professor of practice with IIT Jodhpur. And prior to this, she worked with the government of India as an officer on special duty with the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor. She's deeply involved in policy development, R&D innovation and delivery of programs geared towards the creation of a science-based entrepreneurial ecosystem in India. Nicole Henry is the Chief of Staff to Australia's Chief Scientist. As Chief of Staff, Nicole plays a key role in as strategist, consultant and implementer to support the Chief Scientist in delivering on the many and varied priorities, which is also required to quickly build strong and trusting relationships across government and with industry partners. Prior to joining the Office of the Chief Scientist, Nicole had a diverse range of roles, including General Manager for Strategy and Operations at the National Measurement Institute, Project Manager for the National Hydrogen Strategy Task Force, and before that, held roles leading the Global Digital Policy Team and Trade Facilitation Team. Of note, Nicole has a proven track record for influencing public policy outcomes. She's highly regarded for her technical expertise in brokering government and industry outcomes, both internationally and within Australia. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Patrick Brenier, advisor on the European Research Area and Open Science in DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Patrick joined the Commission in 2001, following 10 years in the French administration, and at the Commission has contributed to European Union's R&I policy, notably the nascent European Research Area, guidance to knowledge transfer, fiscal and other incentives to business investment and R&D state aid. He moved in 2010 to economic analysis and the assessment of member states' research and innovation policies as part of the European semester, before joining in 2014 the Open Science team, where he initiated the European Open Science Cloud. And since 2018, he has occupied various positions in charge of the new R&I strategy for sustainable competitiveness, the strategic planning of Horizon Europe and the coordination of its programming, and finally the launch of the ERA and the preparation of a new European innovation agenda. I'm sure you'll agree with such panelists, we're in store for a fascinating discussion. So taking the first of these themes, and over the past few years, we have seen an increase in mission-driven research, whether it's via the Global Sustainable Development Goals, the US Cancer Moonshot, or Horizon Europe missions. And we're really seeing, policymakers want to promote solutions to the world's most pressing problems, but they also need to demonstrate a return on investment to the taxpayer. We also know that fundamental research is really key. It's the basis for a lot of innovation and application of research and does require long-term funding. So I'm interested to hear from the panelists, how do politicians square this tension? How can we ensure that we find the right balance? So maybe go to Patrick, you first. Are we seeing, do you believe that there's a tension between an increasing desire from governments and funders to focus on mission-driven research and researchers looking to focus on more fundamental research? Is there a true tension there?
Thank you very much, Susie, for this very pertinent question. And hello, everyone. I think that it's no doubt there is a tension because funding is limited and the number of researchers is also limited. So it's the position of most member states in the in Europe and of the European Union that we need to work both on the long term and the short term, on the scientific frontier, more fundamental, but at the same time win the hearts of the citizens and the people, and also of the companies, by actually understanding what are the challenges that they're facing and targeting more of our resources towards these challenges. So in the past, we call them societal challenges or grand challenges. So there was already that idea that we cannot just do research in a serendipitous way and expect new technologies and innovations to appear and basically do wonders for our problems. We also need to give a gentle push in the right direction through strategic orientations and things like that, so that we channel more funding towards what really matters for the people. And that is at the origin of this new focus on missions, mission-oriented initiatives or moonshot missions. And we have recently launched 5 of them. It's pretty much still at an experimental stage because we don't want to just do a big project. We want to do something that involves and engages many people, many stakeholders, and also the people, the public at large. So we've chosen the soil, the waters, the climate, the cities, because we think that these are the issues that people want to solve now. So there is a tension, but we're covering all corners. That's our policy.
Thank you. And Nicole, are you seeing such a tension in Australia? And obviously you've just had an election there as well. So I'm interested to know, how do you find that tension between what sort of long-term research goals and what can sometimes be short-term political agendas?
So I think absolutely, completely agree with what I've been hearing, but I think it's really important to think about the way we reflect on what the definition of what a mission-based research can be. And if we look at technical readiness levels, it could be anywhere from TRL 1 through to 9 and then into early stage commercialization. So a mission-based activity can actually cover the whole gamut. It doesn't necessarily have to be at that proof of concept or early stage commercialization end. And it's to our detriment if we actually do that, because you've got no pipeline. So fundamentally, completely agree with the premise that there is a tension and that we do need to have a balance. But that balance is going to wax and wane and shift and move. It's not something that is fixed. We need to be able to shift and move to the point that Patrick was making. It depends on the societal challenges and the priorities of your government. But I think we need to make sure that we have a mix of both fundamental and applied research, and there is room for mission-based challenges to cover the whole gamut of what fits within that space.
That's interesting. So actually, so within mission-based research is it a massive chunk of fundamental research as well that is sort of sitting there and underpinning it?
Totally. So if you think about Mazzucato, or even earlier back into where we were talking about putting a man on the moon, at that point in time, we were not at an applied research capability. We were talking about blue sky, discovery, research in a lot of the elements at that point. So I think, you know, we have a real cultural challenge with government who think in short-term cycles and have a desire and a valid need to be able to look after the interests of the community and be efficient and effective in the distribution of taxpayer money. Absolutely legitimate. But we also have to think about what are the best interests of the society in the longer term. And quite often, a number of, like, research doesn't work in those tiny little 3-4 year cycles. It can take a very long time to be able to pull that research through. If we look at quantum, for example, which is a significant priority for the Chief Scientist of Australia, Dr. Cathy Foley, if we look at where we are now in terms of quantum capability, that is not a new investment in quantum capacity. That has taken 20, 40, 60 years of physics research to get it to the point of being something that people go, this is pivotal for our future, that we need to recognise that there is a possibility of what the difference is going to make there. If we did not make that investment and recognise the capability of our physicists and the research that was being made, we would not be where we are today.
Yeah, very, very true. Aisha, just to bring you in on this as well. I just wonder whether you what your thoughts are on the broad topic, but also, do you think that, you know, are there ways that how, you know, policymakers can sort of gently orientate, you know, research without prescribing it? Doesn't have to be that sort of, you know, tension that I used in my opening remarks, but is it something that actually people can sort of guide and shift and encourage rather than prescribe?
Absolutely. I think this is a very, very important topic. And from the government's perspective, one needs to understand that their focus is about consolidation. They see that, yes, so many different areas research is happening, but they also want to see that how do they consolidate those outcomes and how then they use those outcomes to create an impact for their country. And I think one beautiful example which has worked in India is that how does the central government lay out certain priorities for themselves, that okay, these are the 5 technology areas, or these are the 5 sectors, or these are the 5 problems that I want to solve for my country. And then, of course, the researchers will pick and choose voluntarily that, yes, do I want to contribute to the national growth by solving one of these problems? So I think that's a very smooth way of trying to put out forward that where do we need science for society, and then give that academic independence to researchers, to academic universities and labs to say that, okay, this is where I might want to further contribute and say that how I can help in solving that problem. So that provides a smooth platform for, I would say, the academic independence as well as prioritization by the nation to solve problems using research. The two can go hand in hand. And of course, balance has to be the key to make it happen. Thanks.
Yeah, so I suppose there's always, you do sometimes have this perception of academics sort of sitting in their lofty ivory towers, but actually the real world is they're very attuned to what's going on and what's needed to happen. So do you think, just very finally on this topic, and just quickly from, you know, all of you, you know, do you think, you know, are academics much more attuned now than perhaps they were 20, 30, 40 years ago to the need to sort of demonstrate that money's being well spent and that actually their research is going to have tangible outcomes? Patrick, should we go to you very quickly first?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have a younger generation of researchers and new universities which are very eager to be fully embedded in society, and they do not see the ivory tower of the past as a workable model. And I think this is extremely exciting for policymakers. And I'll just like to add something. I'm in perfect agreement with what Ayesha and Nicole just said. I think there is an element of mission-oriented research, which also is very important, is the fact that these missions usually are transversal. If you want to improve the situation in the city, you need to work on the energy, on the transport, on the air quality, on many, many things. And that requires multidisciplinarity. And in a sense, it's also a way for breaking the silos between disciplines, which researchers actually want themselves. So basically, the missions is a way to try to bring together what the best knowledge and best expertise available across disciplines, without saying that the solution should come from that discipline or from that discipline. The combination of disciplines that will address the problem is usually not known at the start. And that, I think, is something which is very exciting for everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nicole, did you want to come in as well?
Absolutely. Patrick,
Raising a hand is fine.
I could not agree more, and I love to talk about it in terms of Isentia in the full meaning of the word, which is STEM and humanities and social sciences all together. The problems that we face as a global community here and into the future are not owned by one discipline. They are, whether you're talking about science and research or you're talking about a government policy area, they are complex, multidisciplinary issues that require all of us to be engaged, to be part of the solution. And I think it's so wonderful. And Kathy, Dr. Foley, Australian scientist, would say science is the beginning. You need the business model, the engineering, the end user design. It is a whole systems thinking in the way that we look at applying these problems and addressing to develop the solutions.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next theme, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I think, of themes in our panel session. But the next one I'd love to get your thoughts on is around engagement with the public. And you know, Patrick and Aisha, I think when we spoke, we touched on this quite a lot. Because really, if you can say there's been any benefit of the global pandemic, it may be that suddenly, you know, the public is much more aware of and engaging with science in a way that we haven't really, you know, seen before. And so, Aisha, maybe if we could start with you. But you know, how important do you think is it to engage with the public during the different stages of policy development? So not just presenting, you know, the final fait accompli to the public and saying this is what's going to happen, but how, you know, and how would you like to see that take place?
I think it's very, very important. And in fact, we have seen in India that it has become a key pillar of policy design and implementation, that how the whole process has become decentralized. And as it is in India, we have the federal government, we have the different states, and then of course we have the larger public who is going to be the beneficiary for any policy that comes out. So there are lots of consultations that happen at different level. The states will provide their recommendations to the center. The domain specialists provide their recommendations to the central government. And once you have a draft of the policy, which is evidence-based, which is prepared bottoms up, you also open it up to the larger public for individual specialists also to come and contribute. So there is a dedicated public engagement platform that has been created, which allows this sort of engagements, and then you open up that policy at least for about 3 to 4 months, where you can get more feedback and then further take up the revised version for approval. So I think it's very, very crucial, very important, because at the end of the day we have to understand that officers sitting in the government cannot just design solutions for people on the ground who are facing the problems. And like Nicole mentioned, that there has to be a process of design thinking, there has to be behavior science, all of these have to be embedded while you are creating a policy. And therefore, you really need to have all your eyes and ears open while you are designing the policy. And you can't design unless you get feedback from the ground. So therefore, public engagement is actually a very, very important pillar for the overall effective policy making process going forward from here. Thanks.
Thank you. But Nicole, I suppose there's engagement, isn't there? And then there's involvement, and they're two sort of different things. And is there a tension there between the public's expectation as to how involved they can be in these kind of discussions?
Totally, and I think it depends on the issue and how invested the public are in the issue. And I just want to 100% agree with Aisha in her comments around the public being the beneficiary of the policy, and really our ministers and our governments of the day are elected officials of the people. So making sure that we have the buy-in, the support, and that we're meeting community expectations is critical. But depending on the policy and the challenge that you're dealing with, you need to be really clear with the public in terms of what your expectations are in terms of involvement. Are you asking them to participate in something where their views will be considered? How will they be considered? Are you asking them to be a decision maker in the process? Is it, one of the examples that I've talked through previously is it citizen science in the terms of where, like, you look out in your community for whatever the type of frogs or birds might be in the habitat? Or are you asking people for their critical feedback in terms of the water quality and distribution and allocation of water that impacts their community versus the number of sectors that have an interest in that? And how are you closing the loop with them after you've actually asked them for that engagement? So I think we absolutely completely have to be engaged with our community to best support our community and to be the best advocates on behalf of the government of the day in gathering the evidence, not only from a scientific perspective, but making sure we are bringing the community along for the journey and taking those views into account, but being fundamentally clear about the purpose of which we are engaging them on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Patrick, it'd be great to get your insight into how the European Commission is handling this. There's a lot of policy engagement goes on at the Commission level, and obviously you've got multiple member states that you need to involve in all of this. It'd be great to get your thoughts.
Well, absolutely. And again, I share perfectly the views expressed by Aisha and Nicole. Every policy making now is done in close consultation with the public. But I think the difficulty of R&I policy is that we are a bit further away from the public than most other policies. If you are in charge of transport policy, you can ask very concrete questions that relate to everyday's life, and people will have strong opinions about that. When we do public consultations on documents, when they're at the draft stage, we are usually very happy when we receive 400 elaborate structured answers. And it takes time to analyze 400 structured answers. But most of these people will be universities, associations, they will be science stakeholders. And there's a bit of a bias, of course, in their opinion, but also they are not necessarily your average person in society. But the trick that we are developing nowadays in the Union is that we are trying to better integrate R&I policy, research and innovation policy, with other policies, so-called the sectoral policies, so that we co-create across policy departments the research and innovation that we'll be supporting. And that actually does a bit of a trick, because these other policies usually have a very good access to citizens and the needs of society, and they mediate. They are mediators to the citizens and to societal needs, in addition to the points of view of researchers. And I think it's I don't remember, Aisha or Nicole said that there are topics on which you will have lots of opinions, very useful. I mean, we have a mission to fight cancer. Everybody is of course thrilled about that and very ambitious about that. If you want to try to address pollution or the environmental damage, people will relate very strongly with that. But we see the limits when we start going into the climate, for instance, because the climate challenge, of course, is something that is very strong for the younger generation. But a lot of people see this as a long-term, something that will not necessarily impact their life. So but we know we need to do that. So citizens' engagement or engagement with people at large needs also to compensate for this natural bias that there is between the things that are in front of you and the things that are there that are hidden, but you need to care about them. And I think the co-creation with other policy departments is a great way. Not an easy one. So it's a great.
I can imagine. Good, thank you. Thanks for those great insights from all of you. So the other thing we wanted to sort of look at was around impact, and measure what matters is a truism in business and and beyond. And I know that funders and institutions are increasingly trying to move away from assessing research and researchers on what can be potentially oversimplified metrics. But does moving it to a more narrative case study driven approach in this area have its own drawbacks? Does excellence and impact ultimately come down to subjective opinions? So my first question, I think, to all of you, I'm interested to know what you think we mean by impact. Nicole, in the Office of the Chief Scientist of Australia, what do you mean by impact, and how do you measure it?
The change state, right? When we're looking at impact, what is the change that is actually being generated as a result of the research? What is it that we've actually achieved? And my concern is that issues like impact, quality, integrity all get mixed up together and conflated, and they kind of don't actually have enough light of day between them, particularly when it comes to those who aren't as close to the subject matter as the science and research community. And we have an educative obligation there at the moment that I think is really shining through when we talk about what we mean, particularly when it comes to integrity. And when we talk about impact and quality, they are different things, and we need to really support that. So I'd be really interested to know what my colleagues on the panel think about this, because when I think about integrity, it's really about that you have done it with a really good process, and that the quality is about the rigor. And when we come at the impact, it's really about the outcomes and the change state that you are looking for from the research.
Aisha, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think impact is a change that you can really measure. And of course, when we do large projects, we tend to confuse the inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact. And researchers generally try to be happy when they start seeing some outputs and outcomes. But from the government's perspective, it's very important to be able to use those outcomes, put that into a lens where you can measure the change that has actually been created. So impact is very important, and I think one has to be able to create awareness on what really impact means. Otherwise, you're right that industry looks at impact from a different lens. For researchers, impact is different, but from the government's lens, impact is different again. But there has to be a measurable outcome that you can say. And of course, there will be a lot of times that you will have to create indicators to be able to say that this is how I will measure my outcome, because sometimes there's a lot of subjectivity. For example, if you're talking about, let's say, creating problem solvers among scientists, it's difficult for you to measure the mindset change in a scientist. But if you use proxies like what kinds of innovations a scientist can really provide for problem solving or solving a societal problem, that is a good measurable outcome that you can use to say that yes, my 10-year journey has actually resulted in a mindset change, and which is the impact that I have created in the science community. So one has to be able to measure using such proxies, I would say. Thanks.
Patrick, I mean, how does the Commission, measure it? But also, is there do you see a danger if we don't have a common understanding of what we mean by impact? If people are actually coming at it from, using different, terminologies, different descriptions, do we run into trouble then?
I wouldn't be, thank you, but I wouldn't be so worried about the fact that there's a bit of a fuzziness about what exactly people expect from our investments. As long as it takes seriously the expected impacts that make sense for them. And I cannot resist but to quote you that we have recently adopted a pact for research and innovation in Europe. And we went through a reflective process to identify what are the core values that we should share amongst ourselves. And one of them is value creation and societal and economic impact. So, and value creation means we create value in all senses of the term. Of course, as Ayesha said, the scientists will look predominantly at pushing the scientific frontier further. Company will look at its turnover and its benefits. The policymaker will look at the policy challenges that it needs to address and be accountable to its parliament. You started saying we measure, or we should measure what matters, but in reality, what happens is that we measure what we can measure.
Well, we can.
and usually, if we lose track of that, we end up chasing the wrong target. And it's easier to measure impacts in terms of the functioning of the research system. So, are we sufficiently open? Do we respect ethical standards? Are we sufficiently excellence-driven? Do we have enough mobility? Are we sufficiently inclusive? What is the quality of what we produce using bibliometrics? And of course, this is not enough. This is the easy part to measure. But in addition to that, we need to measure impact, societal, economic, scientific, which is much harder, and which is a science in itself, I think, on which we continue reflecting and try to improve our methods. And what I think the whole community is getting to slowly is that there is not one easy way to do that. There is not one single indicator that will do the trick. So assessment methods, which are under reform everywhere, I think, need to look at the qualitative side of the assessment in addition to the quantitative side. And we need to include both the well-functioning of the system, but also the concrete milestones that we achieve. And one way that we are experimenting now is we have defined, or we have worked and defined about 30 expected impacts, which are a bit specific in our program. And we've asked our colleagues who are defining the topics for research that whatever they want to do, they need to be able to say that their topic is one way or another going to contribute to an expected impact. Because otherwise, the discussion can be completely separate. There is what you aim for, and then there is what you fund. And ex post, you try to reconcile the both. Now, you have actually to realize that some of the things that you want to fund actually do not really correspond to a clear expected impact. It cannot be the case. It's not a priority.
That nicely leads into actually our next topic. And actually, I just wanted to give a quick reminder to our audience. If you do have any questions for the panelists, please do pop them into the chat box. And we'll get to. We've got 9 minutes left of our session. I just want to sort of cover a couple of just points on the next point, and then hopefully we can go to some questions to round off the session. But you talk about funding there, Patrick, and we are seeing new approaches to how the funding of research around the world, whether it's in Europe or in China or in Australia and India and the US. And we've mentioned a lot in the session around sustainable development goals, grand challenges, societal goals. Is that where those funding decisions and those new approaches to funding are coming from? Being typified by the UN SDGs. I'm just interested, just in a couple of minutes. Are you finding that sustainable science is featuring more prominently in funding decisions? Aisha, be interested to sort of know, particularly in both in terms of your previous role, but also actually now where you are at the World Bank as well.
That's correct. In fact, what I'm working on right now is also to be able to see that how one can use the lens of green innovation while using financial instruments. So yes, what we need to understand is that sustainability is a very complex subject. There are multiple verticals under it. What India has done is also taken up the SDG goals, broken it out to the Indian context, and now different states are working towards achieving them. And you can use the tools of science and technology also to be able to achieve those sustainable development goals. So I would say that yes, from our country's perspective, green science is a very important lens that is cropping up now, because as more and more technology development is happening, we are seeing some problems also cropping up. So we have to at the same time develop solutions which will ensure that these environment or biodiversity related problems do not crop up. So I would say that yes, green science, green innovation is important, and you can look at it from the lens of how do you produce energy, how do you consume energy, and then what are the different kinds of emissions and wastes that you create in your entire economic growth from the country's perspective. And one can see that where am I producing the maximum waste, and therefore what kind of green innovations or green science do I need to invest in more. So that becomes a key priority for us for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Nicole, it'd be good to get your thoughts on sort of the this increased interest in ESG from governments in guiding research.
I think it's really important, particularly when you look at the nature of the challenges that you face as a country or globally today. They are very environmentally, socially, and governance orientated. And as we look at issues like circular economy and how we look at our recycling, you cannot help but see that issues regarding sustainability are front and centre in terms of those investment decisions. The role of the chief scientist is really about providing advice to government, who are the decision makers. And for us, Dr. Foley's been asked to put science at the heart of policy making. And so when you look at that and you think about the evidence base that has really been front and centre in terms of our conversation here, I was going to say this evening, but I think that's mostly my time rather than anybody else's time. You cannot help but go, we need to be making our funding decisions that recognise our institutional stewardship responsibilities and those responsibilities that we have to future generations. And so looking for those trends and patterns that enable a really good investment for green science, recognising that a government's fundamental economic premise is around addressing public good priorities or looking at where there is a market failure. So I think there's a convergence here, and it's not just about how government look at these issues, but it's about how industry and the other players that are part of our society and who create the impact and the economic productivity all form part of this together.
Great, thank you. Patrick, I haven't got time to come to you on this one, but we have got a question from the audience, so maybe I can come to you first on that one, just in the last few minutes before we wrap up. Just looking, so we had a question, can you talk about key elements that foster innovation and ensure research benefits society in multiple ways? How is open science relevant in this context? I have to warn you, we have 4 minutes left for everybody, and we've just hit the words open science, which I think, again, could be massive section. But Patrick, but maybe you could just, just give us some very top line thoughts around, how relevant is open science actually in all of this?
No, absolutely. Open science, we have also open data policy. It's basically everything that the public funds should one way or another find its way in the broader economy, because we know the impacts of what we do for science, but we don't know what impacts it can have elsewhere. So by default, the things that we fund produce results and data that need to be accessible and reusable under very minimal licensing conditions. That's really what we want to do. And basically, open science and open innovation are the two sides of the same coin. You want people and ideas to move freely. In the end, when the private sector invests, it will protect its investments. This is another business. But we are public actors. We need to ensure that what we fund benefits most people within science and outside of science.
Thank you, Nicole. There's lots of nodding going on from you.
Sorry, I realised that's probably distracting, but I couldn't agree more. And probably the one example that I would use is development of COVID vaccines, right? If you want to plug for open science, look at how fast we had, untold years of RNA vaccine development, and then we get to a pandemic crisis. You make the sequencing available to the science community more broadly, and very, very quickly we get to a solution. And it is a testament to the capability, the collaboration and the investment of the science community, and fully is a demonstrated example of the value of open science.
And Aisha, just some final thoughts from you on the open science topic.
I couldn't agree more with Patrick and Nicole, and I would say definitely is the need of the hour. And in fact, for governments to grow, for nations to grow, both competition and collaboration have to coexist. And collaboration can happen only if you have open science. And yes, COVID was a beautiful example. The diagnostics also would not have been possible if you didn't have those databases existing. So yes, competition makes you better, but collaboration allows you to solve large, complex global problems are growing up now for the earth. So I guess all countries have to really work collaboratively. And yes, we can't solve these complex problems if we don't have open science.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, as I knew, we could be carried on talking for many more hours on these topics. Thank you all. We have come to the end of this panel session, but can I just thank you all for joining me today? It's been a fascinating conversation, and I for one look forward to continuing some of these conversations with you and with others via emails and other forums as well as we go forward. But thank you all very much for sparing the time today.